Good morning, everybody. Good morning, hello, and welcome. My name is Ikenna Azwike, and it is my pleasure to wish you all a very warm welcome to the second European Humanitarian Forum. Oh, not even, yes. Excellent. Well, that was absolutely appalling. That was terrible. Listen, everybody, I know that the crises we'll be talking about here today and over the next couple of days are literally existential for many people, and you will certainly have to bring the best versions of yourselves in order to address those challenges. But we have to take the joy where we can, and given that you've all traveled from across the world, literally, to see friends and colleagues, I think this is one of those moments, so I'm going to give you another chance. Hello, everybody. Good morning. Yes. Good. Wonderful. Very good. Much better. Right, before I get on to the all-important housekeeping and introduce some rather important people to you, there is one thought I'd like to sort of kick off the next 2 days with, and that is, like for many people who are outsiders to your world, the world of humanitarian aid, I sometimes teeter on the brink of losing hope, get cynical, get worried about the ability of all of you, us, to help those most in need. But occasions like this are a little bit of a dopamine shot, if you like. They give me hope that change is feasible. There is so much potential gathered here under one roof to do good. There are many, many people around the world who need your help. The words that are spoken here today, the decisions that are taken, the action that is pledged and then implemented are literally words, decisions, actions that the most vulnerable people around the world wouldn't even dare to dream of. So you are fighting on their behalf. They need you. They need your knowledge, your expertise, your ability to think in terms of opportunities and possibilities. And they need you now more than ever. So over the next 2 days, when you are considering ideas that you're hearing or opinions, please, for a moment, suspend judgment. Don't be quite as cynical or worried or shoot it down and say, oh, it's too expensive. I've done that before, or that person hasn't been on the ground. They don't know what they're talking about. Suspend judgment. Really try and understand where the other person is coming from and why they said what they said. And be open to nurturing that idea. Okay? Right, on that cheery note, on to the all-important housekeeping bits and pieces. They've been going around on the screen, I believe. Let's see what we've got here. The other mic is now working as well. First of all, this event is now being recorded, so everything will be available on the EHF website shortly. The Wi-Fi password, I believe, is straight up there. For those of you in the room, please put your mobile phones on silent. We don't want any of your Beyonce ringtones going off. Feel free to share your conversations online, though, using the hashtags EHF 2023. Interpretation services, obviously, are also available in 3 different languages. And finally, although there is ample room for questions and comments over the next couple of days, for today we've got a very full program, so there are no questions in this session, but please do keep your questions coming in. For instance, for those at home, via the stream, via Slido, using the access code, which is also on the screen. And for those of you, obviously, physically here, just do it the analog way by showing up to sessions and putting your hands up. Okay, it is now my pleasure to introduce you to our hosts. And first of all, we have the European Commissioner for Crisis Management. Please give a warm round of applause to Mr. Janez Lenarčič.
Ladies and gentlemen, good morning. It's a great pleasure to be with you today and to welcome you to this second edition of the European Humanitarian Forum. I'm particularly pleased that this morning, along with the leaders of the global humanitarian community, we have so many ministers from the EU member states with us. And I look forward to bigger and better discussions than ever before. However, we also meet at a time of more challenges than ever before. We all know that the world is getting more dangerous. Humanitarian needs have exploded globally. We see disastrous weather events in increasing frequency and ferocity. We see the reality of the climate crisis everywhere we look. And tragically, we see war continue in Europe with ongoing Russian aggression against Ukraine. To add to this complexity, the gap between the global humanitarian needs and the resources we have at our disposal continues to grow. Today, 1 in every 23 people on this planet are in urgent need of aid. These are huge challenges, and we must rise to them. I want you to think about 3 points to consider over the coming days. Firstly, we need multilateralism in our changing world. At least 80% of humanitarian needs are driven by war. We have seen this over the past year in the many continuing conflicts around the world. It is therefore vital that we work together to maintain respect for international humanitarian law. Only this way can we ensure that civilians in conflict zones are protected, whatever the situation. And only this way can we hold those responsible accountable when the protection fails. And in this context, I want to strongly welcome the arrest warrants issued last week by the International Criminal Court against those responsible for illegal deportation of Ukrainian children. Secondly, we need solidarity in the face of growing dangers. Last month in Gaziantep, I saw firsthand the overwhelming devastation people face following disasters like the earthquakes that hit Turkey and Syria. I'm proud that the EU Civil Protection Mechanism once again powered quick response, quick deliveries of assistance from across Europe to those in need. However, we urgently need more support from more donors. Worldwide, the 10 largest contributors give over 80% of all humanitarian funding. This is unsustainable. Being there for the most vulnerable must be a globally shared responsibility. We must all do what we can to ensure that this duty is balanced more equally across the international community. Thirdly, we need ambition. The worsening global situation must force us to think smarter, do better, to push the boundaries of what's possible. Not just to help those in immediate need, but to follow this up with strengthened resilience and sustainable development, helping to build long-term solutions. And we need to make the connections between crises, anticipating where disasters might strike, and investing in preparedness. Multilateralism, solidarity, ambition. I ask you to hold these ideas in your mind during this forum. They can help us to see humanitarian aid in a new light and to ensure that no one in need is left behind. I look forward to the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Commissioner. And next to the podium, please give a warm round of applause to the Minister for International Development, Cooperation and Foreign Trade, representing the Council of the European Union, Mr. Johan Forssell.
Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I'm very pleased to welcome you to the second edition of the European Humanitarian Forum, hosted by Sweden and the European Commission. I thank you for joining us here in Brussels or online to discuss how to tackle the urgent humanitarian challenges that the world is facing. And we meet here today amid an unprecedented global humanitarian emergency. And it is, of course, dramatically worsened by Russia's illegal and unprovoked aggression against Ukraine. A record 339 million people will need emergency aid this year. That almost equals to the whole population of the United States, or more than 33 times of Sweden. And this is a threefold increase in only a few years, and the gap between needs and available funding keeps growing. How to close this gap must be the main focus for our discussions at this forum. And let me kick off those discussions by outlining three areas where we need to see change. First and foremost, more donors need to provide humanitarian funding. The humanitarian system today gets nearly 90% of its resources from the 10 largest donors. Secondly, we need to enhance the efficiency and effectiveness of humanitarian action to save more lives despite limited resources. And this means sharper prioritization when humanitarian appeals are underfunded. As donors, we must support by providing multi-annual but also flexible funding so that the humanitarian system can respond more quickly and efficiently to sudden crises, such as the catastrophic earthquakes in Turkey and Syria. Thirdly, we need to reduce the humanitarian needs by strengthening vulnerable people's resilience. We need to find ways to uphold basic services and ensure that development actors can stay engaged in fragile and conflict-affected contexts. This will reduce the size and the cost of aid operations, but also restore the dignity of affected people. I give you an example from the Horn of Africa, where climate change has triggered the worst drought in 4 decades, resulting in pockets of famine. This could and should have been avoided. We must build resilience to future shocks by scaling up anticipatory action. Ladies and gentlemen, facing tremendous pressure, humanitarian workers continue to save lives, but the system is overstretched. We owe it to the many millions of people in need to ensure that the humanitarian system can keep delivering. And I hope that with the engagement of all of you, we will be able to close this forum tomorrow with a clearer path forward, with an agenda for change, to not only ensure that we can meet the needs of the most vulnerable, but also to reverse the trend and push the humanitarian needs back. Change is not only needed, it is also necessary. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Minister. Next up to the stage is the High Representative of the Union for Foreign Affairs and Security Policy, as well as being the Vice President of the Commission. Please give a warm round of applause to Mr. Josep Borrell Fontanelles.
Commissioner Lenarczyk, dear colleague, Minister Forsell, other colleagues, ministers, excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. This is an impressive meeting. This is an impressive gathering of people, and this is a very important subject. I am afraid I'm going to repeat some of the things that has already been said. But allow me to try to frame humanitarian on the broader foreign policy of the European Union, foreign and security policy of the European Union. As you have said, both, humanitarian needs are at a historic high. More than The figure says 339 million people. I wonder how this count has been done, but let's say about 300, 400 million people are in need of emergency assistance. These are not figures about poverty. It's about emergency, which is something different. The number of poor people is much bigger, but people in extreme need is at the historic high and an upward trend. These figures are going to increase because the trends who are pushing are not going to change soon, unhappily. Things were already very bad before the 24th of February. But with the war against Ukraine, the situation has made much worse, dramatically worse, due, among other things, to the exacerbated global food crisis. This war is sending shock waves around the world. Not only the Ukrainians or the Europeans, people very far away from Ukraine are being affected because suddenly there is no grain, and there is no grain because it is being blocked. And there is grain but very expensive, and someone can buy and others not. So yes, this war has made things much worse, but it is not the only war. We talk a lot about it, and I will do it in some minutes at the Foreign Affairs Ministers today, but there are many other wars. Don't forget them. From Ethiopia to many other places, the war has been creating an incredible emergency for millions of people. And then come the natural disasters, Turkey and Syria, earthquakes, climate change impact, more frequent climate events, floods in Pakistan. We cannot master geology. We cannot master what's happening inside our planet. We should master what we human beings do, at least. If we cannot master earthquakes, at least we should try to prevent the shocks among human beings fighting against each other. This is from the point of view of demand. Let's look at the supply. If you look at the supply, we see that the gap between resources and needs continues growing. In 2022, last year, the three largest global donors, and we, the European Union, we are one of them, accounted for 2/3 of all humanitarian assistance. I very much welcome that you, ministers, today will announce your planned humanitarian funding for 2023 at this year forum. But keep in mind that the three big donors, and we are one of them, represent 2/3 of the humanitarian assistance. Others talk a lot, but do much less. And providing the basic needs for people affected by crisis should be a shared responsibility for the international community all together. Economies should contribute to the humanitarian funding at a level consistent with the weight in the world economy. The richer you are, the bigger is your responsibility. And the burden has to be shared in accordance with the capacity of each one, as we do through our fiscal systems on paying our taxes inside our nations. But it is not the case. It's not the case today. And we need to step up our work on broadening the donor base, going beyond us and our like-minded countries. We have to work with countries who are not like-minded with us. They exist, they are important, they have to be put together with us on facing this problem. But not everything is about funding. We need to double down our commitment to humanitarian principles and respect for humanitarian law. It's not a matter of quantity, it's a matter of quality. Humanitarian space has been shrinking for years. And in the current geopolitical environment is making even more difficult to reverse this trend. More and more humanitarians are facing a challenging environment, and for them it's more and more difficult to do their work. Unhappily, we talk more about war than about peace. I personally am talking a lot about war. And believe me, it doesn't make me happy. I would like to be spending more time and energies to discuss and to push for humanitarian support and development aid. Humanitarian action cannot stand alone. It's not a matter of coming after the disaster to try to mend, to try to take care of the people after the disaster, after the war or during the war. What we need to have is to reverse the current trajectory on drivers of humanitarian needs. Yes, I know we can never will be able to prevent a earthquake or to avoid a flood, but we can try to control the climate in order that these events are less extreme or less frequent. But we should be able to master the forces of the humankind, because many of our problems are the result of human action or inaction. Because sometimes not doing is as bad as doing. And this requires political leadership, diplomatic action to prevent and to end conflicts. It requires that we become better linked, putting together the efforts of humanitarian assistance, development, and peace building, the famous triple nexus. And that's right, that's true. No peace without development, no development without peace. But who is first? Both things have to go together. And I have the chance of looking at that in many places of the world. In order to push for development, we need peace. But this peace is so fragile if it is not based on development. Because when people live below a certain level of existence, the tendency is to fight with the neighbor, to fight as a way of solving scarcity. My scarcity depends on the scarcity of the others. So we have to work on this triple approach: development, peace building, and humanitarian assistance. Humanitarian assistance is an important part of the triangle, but it's not going to solve the problem. You have to go to the root causes of the problem. In the meantime, you have to increase, to give more political visibility and more political support. Let be less rhetoric and more practical. I use the word solidarity at least 3 times a week when I issue my statements. I'm standing in full solidarity with the people of. I want to express my strong solidarity with someone, somewhere. What does it mean, the word solidarity? Which are the practical consequences of my solidarity? It's just a word that doesn't engage me on something concrete. We are using too much the word, and we are not bringing in practice what this word means. Solidarity means that I am together with you. I am ready to share with you my resources and my fate. Yes, your message, the message of the people gathered here who are engaged really on trying to support humanitarian assistance all over the world, has to increase and being heard by the political community. This forum should send a strong message of continued European Union and member states engagement to address the humanitarian crisis through the world. Yes, we can say that we Europeans, we are doing our part. Certainly, arithmetically, we are doing our part. But even if we can be very proud of that, Even if we have to ask the others to contribute and share also their part on their global responsibility, we have to continue asking ourselves, do we do enough? Certainly we can do more and better. And I want to thank here the work of my fellow Commissioner, Janes Lenarčič, permanently engaged on trying to develop our humanitarian assistance dimension in our foreign policy. To all ministers and to all anonymous workers that with their engagement makes this effort possible. Thank you to all of you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Fontenelles. Next, the member of the European Parliament as chair of the Committee on Development and representing the European Parliament, Mr. Thomas Tobé.
Good morning, all distinguished guests. Of course, a warm thank you to Commissioner Lenarčič and Minister Forsell for inviting to this, I would say, extremely important platform, because we face so many major challenges together, so we need to meet. Firstly, and what has been already stated, you know that the global humanitarian needs are record high. 339 million people around the world are in need of humanitarian assistance. This amounts to 100 million more than just 2 years ago. And in addition, only 56% of humanitarian funding needs were met last year. Seriously, these numbers speak for themselves. And we focus many times on the big donors, because we do need to have big donors. And of course, we will keep pushing for that. But we all know that we need to broaden the donor base. That is the only sustainable solution that we need to focus on. And we also, I would say, we also need to focus on non-traditional actors. We also have to integrate more with the private sector, because these are major challenges and we will not meet the needs if we don't open every door. Secondly, we could also, just for a minute, try to imagine the scenario where we will actually meet, that we will manage to meet all the funding needs for 2023. Just imagine that. But I would say that even if we would succeed in doing so, the funding will not be enough to help all vulnerable people who face conflict, famine, or climate-related disasters. We also have to ensure greater efficiency and effectiveness of our humanitarian response. Innovation is an important aspect in this regard. It can take many forms, including innovative shelter, sanitation and water solutions, as well as use of data or innovative financing. And I think this forum could actually be very important in this regard, because it will enable us to put forward new, innovative and efficient approaches to address the current challenges of the humanitarian world. And thirdly and lastly, we all see the very worrying trend that some nations are looking increasingly inwards when they actually should be doing the opposite. To me, it is clear that we cannot ignore the hurricane of humanitarian crisis that is raging around the world. It is a question of saving lives and helping the most vulnerable. At the same time, I say to those who look inwards that our actions is a requirement also to prevent further geopolitical instability and, for example, migration crisis. Political will is crucial to meet the rising humanitarian needs, and I do hope that this forum will be the start of that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Touré. And now the UN Under-Secretary General for Humanitarian Affairs and Emergency Relief Coordinator, Mr. Martin Griffiths.
I was thinking about jumping up, but I thought I'd fall over, so I probably shouldn't do it. Thank you very much indeed for this opportunity on this very important day, at this very important forum. It's a great privilege. I want to thank the European Union and all its member states for the day, but also for the commitment to support the work that so many people in this room lead. As we've already heard, the figures are dire, but also there are pockets of belief and commitment and achievement. Last year, for example, we reached 160 million people with assistance around the world, thanks to the generosity and support of so many people here today. That's no small feat. Humanitarianism has deep, deep roots in Europe. The continent has long built bridges between all its citizens and extended that link with the rest of the world. Europe's impulse to help people in need in places far away as well as near must be protected through forums like this and nurtured and indeed, we hope, expanded. As you know well, from the side of the United Nations, we have a range of response plans, pooled funds around the world, vehicles for that humanitarian work, for the expression of those principles. And as we have already heard this morning, these plans are on average barely half funded. However, I remain somewhat optimistic that this year we will end better than last. The key issue is, as always, how do we make sure that the system that we are all involved in, that we represent and that many people here lead, is fit for purpose? Let me highlight two ways to look at this. The raison d'etre of the humanitarian system is to pragmatically address people's need for relief and protection. The humanitarian community, therefore, it follows, must be driven by the people we serve. And it follows from that that means listening closely to what people in crisis tell us, waiting, stopping, listening, so that they can tell us and better inform the response that is driven by their observations, their priorities, and their views. That's not easy. It's essential. Which brings me to the second point, that we must always do this in concert with others. Most crises are compound in nature, driven by a combination of armed conflict, climate change, failed development, political turmoil, epidemics, human rights violations, economic decline, the many, many horsemen of our apocalypse. In the worst cases, people end up facing famine. We humanitarians cannot address these challenges in silos. We can only succeed when we stand shoulder to shoulder with those working for climate justice, with those investing in development, in peace, public health and human rights. Minister Borrell has just referred to the triple nexus as a guide. And that world that we look at, in which we exit our silos, has entrusted us with an exceptional agenda, great responsibilities, great values. We already enjoy exceptional partnership within and between and among the humanitarian community. We need to go beyond that. We need to partner with those who are not humanitarian, with those who do things differently, and even with those who have different values. Governments, civil society, activists, the private sector, as has been referred to by Thomas. We need all of these to help us do our work better. When we listen carefully and slowly, and with time and with patience, to what people in the world's many crisis zones tell us, it's very clear they expect all of us, not just humanitarians, all the communities of value, to be at their side, to have exactly the solidarity that Joseph was talking about. It's a privilege to be here in Europe. It's a privilege to be part of your discussions, and it's a privilege to be part of your partnerships. We have a great year ahead of us, demanding, difficult, and necessary. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Griffiths, and that is exactly the spirit. Thank you. And finally, President of the International Committee of the Red Cross, Ms. Mirjana Spoljaric-Egger.
High Representative, dear Commissioner, dear Ministers, Excellencies, and dear colleagues. During my first months as President of the International Committee of the Red Cross, I have witnessed firsthand grievous humanitarian suffering and despair. In Ethiopia, Mali, Syria, Ukraine, and beyond, successive tragedies have left deep-rooted scars. So I have great respect for the task ahead, and I am acutely aware of our collective responsibility. It is a basic tenet of humanity that human life and dignity must be protected. Since I have the honor to participate in the opening of this very important forum, allow me to reflect on some of the important points that have been mentioned by the previous speakers. First, international humanitarian law exists to prevent senseless suffering. International humanitarian law is a powerful, universal consensus that protects us all. Every state is bound by the Geneva Conventions. No matter the circumstances that give rise to war, limiting its human cost by all parties to conflict is a legal obligation. And all states have an obligation not only to respect, but also to ensure respect for international humanitarian law. The EU and its member states have given IHL the prominent place that it deserves in their external action. I urge you to continue to elevate this respect as one of your primary political goals. The integration of international humanitarian law domestically and in foreign policy also must remain a priority for states globally. And second, principled humanitarian action lies at the heart of alleviating suffering and must therefore be supported. The ICRC's mandate and experience are unique. Our principle of neutrality and consequent ability to speak to all parties to conflict show time and again that we can secure long-term access to those in need, and that we can influence the behaviors of those who hold power and weapons. You can protect and support principled humanitarian action concretely by working towards standing and well-framed humanitarian exemptions in EU autonomous sanctions regimes. And third, humanitarian needs are dynamic and increasing. We are doing our part, adapting our response to the changing realities on the ground so that we can remain efficient and a trusted humanitarian organization. We do mainstream climate adaptation into our responses, and we integrate the opportunities and risks of the digital era. We work with the private sector. In protracted crisis and hard-to-reach areas, we address the critical gaps in early recovery to restore and maintain essential services, where development actors may not be able to operate. And like Martin said, we cannot do it alone. Considering the protracted funding gap, it is people's needs that must guide humanitarian funding decisions, with no crisis left aside. Humanitarian assistance will neither bring lasting peace nor salvage failing economies. But, and especially where others can't operate, the ICRC, together with its national and local partners, can help build resilience within conflict-affected societies. And we can enable pathways to peace and stability. So today, more than ever, international humanitarian law and principled and independent, neutral and impartial humanitarian action needs champions. I'm confident that the EU and its member states will step up to the challenge. Thank you.
Yep, wonderful. Thank you very much, Ms. Egger. We're all confident of that, right? Yes, bit of murmuring. Yes, we are. Okay, it's now time to begin the pledging segment of this opening session. And the first country to share a pledge will be Germany. Please welcome to the stage the Minister of State at the Federal Foreign Office, Dr. Tobias Lindner.
Thank you so much. Good morning, dear colleagues, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, I want to thank you, the ECHO team, and the Swedish EU Council Presidency for organizing this very important event. It could be not more timely, to be honest. Humanitarian needs are at a record high, fueled by protracted conflicts, the aggression of Russia against Ukraine, and increasingly also the effects of the climate crisis. And while we are discussing about broadening the donor space, and we are fully supportive and it's necessary, please allow me to speak about our own responsibility as German government and allow me to open with a more promising and positive story. Just a few weeks ago, Germany, together with Norway, OCHA, UNDP, we organized the Lake Chad conference, addressing, for instance, persistent drought, protracted conflict, and high numbers of displaced populations in the Sahel region. It was extremely important that this conference was hosted and supported by Niger and included many local actors. Together, we managed to agree on operative steps to take, which shall ensure better cooperation of the actors along the humanitarian development and peace nexus, aiming at improved humanitarian access, reinvigorating reconciliation and stabilization efforts, and addressing the impact of climate change. Such a joint approach is exactly what is needed in order to reduce humanitarian needs. In the light of the main topics of the European Humanitarian Forum, I want to highlight 3 points. First, responsibility. I can assure you, Germany remains committed to the cause. We are planning for 2023 with a humanitarian budget of 2.7 billion euro. In the view of record needs, I very much hope that all EU member states join ranks and step up their humanitarian engagement. We should also continue to engage partners outside the European Union, convincing them to contribute more in particular in their respective regions. At the same time, ladies and gentlemen, it is necessary to make the humanitarian system more effective, for example, by improving the way humanitarian development and peace actors coordinate and work together. That's what we addressed with the Lake Chad conference I just mentioned. Second, protecting the most vulnerable. 2 weeks ago, my minister launched the feminist foreign policy guidelines, which also inspire us when we design our humanitarian response. We will ensure that all the projects that we support reflect the specific needs of women and girls, as well as other relevant groups. We also strive to improve their participation in the needs assessment. We work closely with UN Women, and we will step up our fight against the scourge of sexual and gender-based violence, for example, as the new chair of the call to action on protection from the end gender-based violence in emergencies. Last but not least, tackling climate change. We all know the climate crisis is aggravating many already fragile situations. Somalia has not seen a rainy season for 5 consecutive years, whereas South Sudan experienced the worst flooding since years. We have to find ways not only to react, but to act before a crisis hits. Anticipatory action is the right tool to mitigate the humanitarian impact of both extreme weather events and slow onset crisis. Germany has committed itself to spend at least 5% of its humanitarian budget on anticipatory action. We hope others will join us on this approach that saves lives and is more cost effective. Dear colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, global challenges are enormous, but together we do have an impact. We can help those in need and prevent new humanitarian crises. I thank you.
And from Sweden, the Minister for Foreign Affairs, Mr. Tobias Billström.
Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues, we have heard this morning that we meet in a time of unprecedented humanitarian needs. In just 3 years, the number of people relying on humanitarian assistance to survive has more than doubled. Since last year, Russia's illegal war and unprovoked full-scale invasion has left 18 million Ukrainians urgently needing humanitarian aid. Continuing our support to Ukraine in every way, including through extensive humanitarian assistance, remain an absolute priority for Sweden. While doing so, we must also continue to support the hundreds of millions of people in desperate need in other parts of the world. Russia's aggression against Ukraine, a breadbasket of the world, has significantly worsened global food insecurity for those who already had the least. Sweden is proud to be a top humanitarian donor and the second largest donor out of the EU member states. In response to this global humanitarian emergency, Sweden will increase its humanitarian contribution this year. Today, I am pleased to announce an initial contribution of over 800 million euros in humanitarian funding for 2023. But our humanitarian commitment is not only financial. Sweden continues to work actively to ensure effective delivery of life-saving aid. We call for full, safe, and unhindered humanitarian access, always and everywhere, and we urge all parties to conflict to fulfill their obligations under international humanitarian law. We are too often brutally reminded of the extraordinary risks that frontline aid workers face all over the world. Let me close by expressing my personal gratitude and profound admiration for all humanitarian workers working tirelessly to save lives on the ground. Let us take this opportunity to jointly pledge our support to their indispensable work. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed. And now the Minister of Development Cooperation and of Major Cities for Belgium, Ms. Caroline Genet.
Dear Excellencies, dear colleagues, dear Pepe, dear Janusz, dear Johan, thank you for organizing this very important forum. The world is, as been stated this morning, going from crisis to crisis, and the funding gaps keep growing. I have only been in office myself since 3 months, and only then we have been seeing escalated violence in the DRC, the devastating earthquake in Turkey and Syria, women got banned from humanitarian work in Afghanistan, and the war in Ukraine crossed the 1-year mark. Not to mention the many forgotten crises that got away from public attention. Us humanitarians, dear friends, bring hope, or should bring hope, and a sense of humanity to communities that are showing incredible resilience in the most difficult circumstances. And that's why Belgium will continue to share in the international responsibility to respond to needs based on humanitarian principles. Our total budget for this year, 2022, has been mounted to 170 million euros. Commissioner Lenarčič referred to multilateralism, and we as Belgium invest a minimum of 60% of our funding in core or unearmarked funding. And we prove to be a real, flexible humanitarian donor. We allow our humanitarian partners to respond quickly to sudden onset emergencies. Secondly, our humanitarian aid for Ukraine has been additional funding, not affecting our engagements for other crises. And thirdly, to be able to respond better in situations of protracted crisis and to allow for better cooperation with development actors, we will work on adapting our funding mechanisms. Belgium's strategic priorities in humanitarian aid are protection and localization. I think it's extremely important by protecting our vulnerable people that they are at the heart of the discussion. Local actors should be in the driver's seat. And we will keep on advocating for these priorities since we become EU President of the Council at the beginning in 2024. We're then looking forward to organize this forum next year together with Commissioner Lenarčič and High Representative Borrell. And I'd like to end by referring to what Mr. Borrell has been saying. Let's start no longer to use solidarity only as a word. Let's start and engage to fortify solidarity as a deed. Let's work together. Thank you, colleagues.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Ms. June. Okay, we're going to continue. A small request to our remaining speakers. We are running behind the time, and there's a lot to get through, so if you can keep to the 2 minutes allotted, that would be fantastic. Now, for Finland, the Minister for Foreign Affairs, Mr. Pekka Haavisto.
Dear friends, thank you, Commission, thank you, Sweden, for bringing us all together. Good to be here again. While the backdrop is bleak with record high humanitarian needs and an ever-widening funding gap, we must not lose sight of why we are here. For every figure, there is someone in need of humanitarian assistance. I was last week in Turkey at the earthquake area. We met with the victims, but we also met with hope. Our advocacy, efforts and support make a difference to the people in need of life-saving aid. Finland has increased its humanitarian funding in recent years. Our response to the pandemic and assistance to those in need in Ukraine has been additional. In 2022, Finland's humanitarian funding was in total 150 million euros, and this year we will be able to raise our contribution further to help those most in need. We will advocate for disability inclusion in humanitarian action, inclusion of women and girls, for respect for international humanitarian law and upholding the humanitarian principles. We will maintain principled humanitarian assistance and quality funding at the core of our humanitarian action. In line with the triple nexus principle, we will continue to increase coordination between the humanitarian, development and peace sectors. And the risks of the climate change has also mentioned by many of my colleagues. Jointly, we must seek to reduce existing and also unintended barriers for aid. And as donors, we need to continue our efforts to make sure that local humanitarian actors are able to reach the people in need. Thank you.
Wonderful, thank you very much. And now for Austria, the Federal Minister for European and International Affairs, Mr. Alexander Schallenberg.
The Commissioner, Janes, the Minister Forsell, Josep, ladies and gentlemen, dear friends, I will try to stick to the 2 minutes. Let me first thank the Swedish Presidency and the Commission for organizing today's forum. It could not be at a more pressing time. Today, as we have heard, 250 million people are in need of humanitarian assistance. This is a threefold increase since 2015. And we all know that Russia's war of aggression against Ukraine has caused the most severe humanitarian and refugee crisis in Europe since the Second World War. Armed conflicts, natural disasters, COVID-19 pandemic and climate change have put millions of people at risk. And we have to acknowledge, development progress has been halted or even reversed. We are falling back as far as the SDGs are concerned. And in these difficult times, we need to strengthen our humanitarian support. This is exactly what Austria is doing. So far, we have contributed 129 million euros in aid to Ukraine and its neighbors. And we are spending more on humanitarian aid than ever before in Austria. This year, we will provide nearly 80 million euros in humanitarian assistance and 20 million in food aid. We will continue to stand by those most in need. But I want to use this occasion to echo a little bit what Josep Borrell has been saying beforehand. We have to acknowledge that money is not enough. We have to broaden the donor space, but we have to see that although we are one of the biggest donors, if not the biggest donors worldwide, we haven't been able to use this as a political means, as a leverage. Between 2011 and 2021, the EU and the member states have provided over 730 billion euros in humanitarian aid and development assistance. And still, what are we seeing now? Our partners in Africa, in Asia, in the Caribbean, all too willingly pick up the narrative coming out of Beijing or Moscow, even side with these countries in the UN and elsewhere. This is sobering. That must be sobering for us. We have to get better in selling what we are doing, in making our contribution visible, and in connecting our development assistance and humanitarian aid to our economic and political interest. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Schallenberg. And now the Minister of Foreign Affairs, the European Union and Cooperation from Spain, Mr. José Manuel Álvarez Bueno.
Dear colleagues, especially Vice President Borrell and Commissioner Lenarčič, members of the humanitarian community, organizers of the forum, we have gathered here today knowing the demanding times we are now living, particularly for both the beneficiaries and for the humanitarian workers. We have all done impressive efforts doing our best during the last few years, while needs soar and our capacity to respond struggles to catch up. From a donor perspective, it is not surprising that funds for our humanitarian budgets are scarce in a time of uncertainty and economic shocks. We know that we need to go a step further. It is a matter of life and death for millions of people waiting for our support. As Europeans, we have the responsibility to act according to our principles. And it is with that spirit that Spain has recently passed a new cooperation law for sustainable development and global solidarity that includes relevant commitment starting this year and looking forward to 2030. Among those, we will reach 0.7 ODA and dedicate 10% of that to humanitarian action, therefore fulfilling what we see as our moral and political duty. As a first step in that race, our 2023 humanitarian budget will at least reach 150 million euros in a first package. We work in context from Sahel to Ukraine, where Spain put in place an unprecedented humanitarian package to meet the needs without neglecting other humanitarian contexts. By tackling today's needs require more than just funds. We need to understand the root causes and work not only to provide basic needs, but also to enable sustainable solutions. Conflict and natural disasters being the two main drivers in our incoming presidency of the EU, starting July the 1st, Spain will focus on reinforcing the triple nexus and particularly reinforcing the peace pillar of the nexus. It is of essence that we join efforts and coordinate our humanitarian programs with development and peace actions to help us lay the foundation for sustainable society. Spain is in a good position to lead these efforts during the next semester. We have just approved our first humanitarian diplomacy strategy, being one of the first countries to do so. Our presidency will also promote women empowerment in the humanitarian sector and actions against gender-based violence, together with an extended protection of civilians in areas such as education in emergencies or the protection of medical missions. Dear colleagues, you can count on Spain to keep working to provide a better future for the people in need. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. And now for Hungary, the Minister of Foreign Affairs and Trade, Mr. Péter Szijjártó.
Good morning, dear colleagues, and I appreciate the invitation for the organizers. I just would like to let you know very shortly that the humanitarian strategy of Hungary has been determined by two factors. Number one, that we are a neighboring country to Ukraine, and number two, that we are a country with a more than 1,000-year-long Christian statehood, and that gives us responsibility to help and assist the Christian communities all over the world. When it comes to Ukraine, we have been carrying out the largest humanitarian aid operation of Hungary ever. We have received 1.1 million refugees so far from Ukraine. We have allowed everyone to come into Hungary. We give incentive to the employers to employ the refugees, and we give equal access to them to health care and education, which means that Ukrainian kids and students are being enrolled in 1,300 Hungarian schools and kindergartens. This last year, 2022, we have spent more than 100 million euros on that, and we are going to continue this biggest ever humanitarian operation of our country as long as it is needed. Second, we understand that Christianity is the most persecuted religion all over the world, although we are too shy to speak about this. And tens of thousands of Christians are suffering from persecution, discrimination, and terrorist attacks on an annual basis. Therefore, we have established a dedicated department in the Hungarian government, namely the Hungary Helps program, in the framework of which we have spent $80 million in order to help more than 1 million Christians in order not to be forced to leave their homes or to be able to return. This program is going to be continued as long as it is necessary. Thank you.
And now for the Czech Republic, the Minister for Foreign Affairs, Mr. Jan Lipavský.
Ladies and gentlemen, all humanitarian actors, I would like to welcome this opportunity to come together and focus on lessons and challenges related to humanitarian assistance. Czechia is minor but conscious and flexible donor. Under our recent EU presidency, we highlighted and pushed forward several of our thematic priorities, which I believe are of great and shared importance. Firstly, it is disaster reduction and climate security. In view of the growing global fragility, we have to focus more and better on preparedness, prevention, adaptation, and resilience. Secondly, it is the humanitarian diplomacy. We have started this topic in the area of global food insecurity. In my view, all humanitarian actors should try to work more in this area of detecting and reducing fragility, instability, conflict, and forced displacement. And thirdly, it is localization. In all our humanitarian activities, we try to reach the last mile, to the recipients, to the affected communities, to the relevant local stakeholders. We try to build equal partnership to listen and learn about needs and localized solution. And we are able, my country is able to extend funding directly to local actors, and it is also about a desire to enhance participation of local actors in this forum. So let me conclude that hand in hand with the quantity, we target quality and value for money, and this is why we promote localization, humanitarian diplomacy, and climate security. Thank you very much.
Wonderful. Thank you, Mr. Lipavsky. 1 second to spare. And another, I'm being asked to pass on the request once more to really try and keep to time, everybody. Thank you very much. For Slovenia, the Minister for Foreign and European Affairs, Ms. Tanja Fajon.
Good day, dear colleagues, dear friends. Dear all participants, it's great. Thank you, European Commission, and thank you, Sweden, for bringing us all here together today and to continuously always reminding us on humanitarian crisis all around the globe. I think we are all responsible to do much more. The world is changing rapidly and is changing for some for better, but for many for the worse. And it's unbearable and unacceptable to see people dying, to see people suffering from famine, from wars, violence, women, innocent children. We have and must do more. And during my first months of being a Minister for European and Foreign Affairs in Slovenia, we put a special focus and dedication to humanitarian and development aid. And I'm very proud to say that Slovenia has increased our humanitarian funding by 130% in the last year. And we have allocated over 8 million euros to respond to the humanitarian crisis in Ukraine, in Afghanistan, Yemen, Syria, Sahel, Horn of Africa, and beyond. And our contribution to addressing food security has increased 6-fold. So far, we have already allocated more than 4 million euros for humanitarian needs in this year. So I will be committed myself with the team to maintain high-level humanitarian funding also in this year. And just let me conclude. We are all traveling and observing what is happening around the world. And whenever crisis somewhere else is hitting people, it's coming to other side of the globe, to us, in the same way. So that is why we have this shared responsibility. And just my appeal at the end of this forum, we have to support our NGOs on the ground. And we have to support our humanitarian workers and many of our volunteers that are equally fighting to help people in need. So this is our responsibility, and thank you again for having this forum today, and not only today, we have continuously to do our job. Thank you.
Thank you very much. For Estonia, the Minister for Foreign Affairs, Mr. Urmas Reinsalu.
Fellow Europeans, Estonia's humanitarian assistance amounted to 5.2 million euros last year. 42% of our multilateral assistance was provided as flexible funding. Russia's unprovoked war of aggression against Ukraine has had massive and devastating humanitarian consequences for the people of Ukraine and beyond. The solidarity shown across all sectors of Estonian society has resulted in more than 23 million euros of humanitarian assistance to those in need in Ukraine. This has included support for health, shelter, transport, winterization, demining, and critical energy equipment. We will stand by Ukraine and its people. I reiterate, the most effective and the only way to end the humanitarian crisis in Ukraine, as well as its humanitarian impact across the world, is for Russia to stop its aggression. Russia must end the war by fully withdrawing its forces from all occupied territories of Ukraine. The Russian aggression has demonstrated every day the impact of the pervasive lack of compliance with international law, including international humanitarian law. In compliance with international humanitarian law and lack of accountability adds to human suffering and undermines our humanitarian response. In current year, Estonia will commit at least 3.4 million euros for humanitarian assistance. We will continue to stand for international law and humanitarian principles, including as an incoming co-chair of the Good Humanitarian Donorship Network. Thank you.
Thank you. And now the Minister of Climate Crisis and Civil Protection for Greece, Mr. Christos Stylianides.
Dear Commissioner, dear colleagues, dear humanitarian workers, dear colleagues, I always remain humanitarian worker. This is my destiny. This year's European Humanitarian Forum is taking place at a critical geopolitical juncture. There are growing conflicts around the globe. The war in Ukraine, a war in Europe continues. The humanitarian space, as dear friend Lennart says, but also Mr. Bolle said, is shrinking day by day. And climate change, climate crisis, has become a humanitarian crisis. As a result, humanitarian needs continue to increase dramatically. The challenge is huge, but our European Union has a moral duty to stay on the lead of humanitarian efforts. We cannot abandon vulnerable population, especially children. We must remain loyal to our principle, solidarity. The European Union is the leading global humanitarian aid power, and it must remain so. To that end, we need to develop a solid humanitarian aid strategy and policies. It's imperative to go beyond traditional approaches, to adopt a new emergency mentality, to strengthen our union instruments, namely the European Civil Protection Mechanism. Business as usual is not sustainable. This is the framework for Greece's humanitarian aid policies. From Ukraine, Turkey, Syria, Afghanistan, Pakistan, and Democratic Republic of Congo, to name a few. Allow me to focus, however, on two cases. Ukraine. It has been a high priority for the Greek government. We have offered financial and in-kind assistance, and we have contributed to international organizations such as UNHCR and UNICEF, etc., and we will continue to do so. Turkey and Syria. Following the catastrophic earthquake, we mobilized targeted humanitarian aid bilaterally and through the European Civil Protection Mechanisms to address the immediate needs of the victims, especially to establish mobile hospitals. One of the lessons learned is that effective humanitarian aid means targeted aid. My colleague, Foreign Minister Nikos Dendias, and myself visited the affected areas in Turkey immediately after the earthquake. Greece is committed to stand by the affected population for as long as is needed. Dear colleagues, at a time of rapidly increasing humanitarian needs and challenges, this forum provides a unique opportunity. First, to reaffirm our commitment to the fundamental humanitarian principles. Second, to renew our determination to work together. And third, to contribute to our union's humanitarian aid goals. To that end, I'm really pleased to announce that Greece's humanitarian aid pledge for 2023 will be around initially €1,600,000. And at the same time, my dear friends, don't forget that Greece is hosting more than 100,000 people in a daily basis, refugees and migrants. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Stylianides. And now from Malta, the Minister for Foreign and European Affairs and Trade, Dr. Ian Borg.
Good morning, Excellencies. I would like to begin by thanking the European Commission, Commissioner Lenarčič, and Sweden, Minister Forsell, for jointly organizing this year's forum. As we meet today, humanitarian needs around the world are higher than ever before, despite our best efforts. This trend is affected by events ranging from climate and environmental-related disasters to conflict and war, to name a few causes. We continue to be forced to address the consequences of Russia's war of aggression against Ukraine, which continues to negatively affect people in the region and around the world. In these circumstances, Malta recalls with pride the significant contribution that the EU and its member states have made to addressing humanitarian crises and humanitarian issues around the world. The number of different issues of which we make a difference ranges from providing emergency assistance following natural disasters to promoting respect for international humanitarian law. The agenda and stated ambition of this forum provide a clear signal of our collective interest in cooperating with civil society and local actors as part of our efforts. And I'm quite confident that these coming 2 days will feature several fruitful discussions. My own country, Malta, is committed to make a meaningful contribution as part of EU's overall effort. During our membership of our UN Security Council, which began in January, we have been and will continue to highlight the importance of international action to respond to climate and other humanitarian emergencies. On national level, we are also determined to maintain our commitment to support those in need worldwide. Ultimately, I'm convinced that it is only by acting together at both national and European level that we can meaningfully address the increased humanitarian needs. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Borg. And now the Minister of Foreign Affairs for Cyprus, Dr. Konstantinos Kombos.
Ladies and gentlemen, I would like to express our appreciation to the Swedish Presidency and to the European Commission for organizing this forum, a forum that brings together important stakeholders and facilitates cooperation and coordinated planning on humanitarian challenges. At the same time, the crucial role of the Union and of its member states is highlighted and projected at the global level. In this context, Cyprus has contributed in 2022 to efforts in Syria, Yemen, Afghanistan, Lebanon, and the Palestinian Authority. Furthermore, the majority of our contributions were devoted to the people of Ukraine that are suffering from Russia's ongoing illegal invasion. In 2023, Cyprus provided humanitarian assistance after the recent catastrophic earthquakes in Syria and Turkey. Our planning for the current year remains focused on supporting Ukraine. Moreover, our attention remains on the protracted humanitarian crisis in Syria and Yemen. Our total budget on humanitarian assistance will approximately be €2.5 million. Finally, Cyprus considers the food crisis in the region of the Middle East to be a key human to be a key humanitarian challenge for 2023. This could have a spillover effect, and we must remain vigilant and proactive. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed. Now for Latvia, the Minister of Foreign Affairs, Mr. Edgars Rinkēvičs.
Thank you very much. First of all, I also want to join those expressing appreciation to the Swedish presidency of the EU and Commission. Dear friends, our world experiences multiple and overlapping crises: climate challenges, global food scarcity, conflicts. Solidarity and leaving no one behind are crucial. Last year, Latvia contributed 4 million euros worth of humanitarian aid globally. Main focus on addressing the unprecedented Russian aggression in Ukraine. We've also supported tackling climate change and natural disaster-caused crises like Pakistan and Tonga, humanitarian crises like women and girls' situation in Afghanistan, and food scarcity, especially as a part of the program Grain from Ukraine. Our aid is mostly voluntary contributions through multilateral system or local partners on the ground. We highly value the work and leadership of the European Union and the United Nations. Latvia provides humanitarian aid on ad hoc basis, and we pledge to continue to do our part in addressing these issues. Already in 2023, we have provided humanitarian aid of around 1 million euros to Turkey and the Syrian people. We will continue to actively participate in the European Union Civil Protection Mechanism. In 2023, we will continue to stand strongly for women's rights, especially in conflict contexts. We see the alarming use of sexual and gender-based violence as a tactic of war. Since day one of the Russian aggression war against Ukraine, we provided psychosocial support and rehabilitation for women who have suffered from sexual violence. I do believe that the international community must take all necessary steps to ensure full accountability for sexual and gender-based crimes. We pledge to do our utmost to ensure that. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And now for Bulgaria, the Deputy Minister of Foreign Affairs, Dr. Velislava Petrova.
Hi everyone, a lot has been said already. First, I also wanted to thank the Swedish Presidency, the Commission as well, for bringing us here today. It couldn't be a more timely opportunity now. We are at a time where needs are skyrocketing, but in the same time, resources are plateauing. A lot was said about what we can do better. Certainly, we can do better at trying to connect the dots. Not just talk about this nexus approach, but try to implement it. A lot was said about how don't we lose the narrative. We are one of the biggest humanitarian aid supporter and donor in the EU, but in the same time, we might not be always recognized as one. And why is that? Perhaps we need to think more about working with those on the grounds, listening to the voice of those on the grounds as well, and really try to think of this multilateral approach where we have the civil workers as well and civil society on the ground at the forefront. Bulgaria is also a minor humanitarian donor, but in the same time, in addition to the humanitarian aspect that is financial, we have, as we said, the law and also the humanitarian values, and that's where we are stronger. When it comes to the war in Ukraine, we've welcomed hundreds of thousands of refugees, and many of them have established their homes in Bulgaria now. For 2023, we will continue to pay special attention to humanitarian aid, and 20% of our development assistance is dedicated to humanitarian aid. In terms of geography, we continue to focus on Ukraine, on Syria, on Afghanistan, also on Yemen and Iraq. Our focus continues to be, as it's been so far, on specifically vulnerable groups, women, girls, people with disabilities, and those that have been disproportionately affected by crisis. And here, in the end, I would want really once again to use the opportunity to honor the work of humanitarian workers. I didn't see many women here today so far, but there are many women humanitarian workers, and I wanted to mention their amazing work. Thank you. And what you're doing is not a job, it's a service. And I thank all of you on behalf of all of us, I'm sure, here. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Petrova. Thank you. For Croatia, the Minister of Foreign and European Affairs, Dr. Gordan Grlić-Radman.
Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, it is our human and moral duty to continue demonstrating solidarity with those most in need. It's our duty to remain focused on these challenges and scale up our efforts. Russia's invasion has not only led to skyrocketing humanitarian needs in Ukraine, but had dramatic effects across the world. We are witnessing all the negative consequences of their unjustified military aggression, and this is why respecting the provisions of international humanitarian law is not a choice, but an obligation. Croatia provided over 160 million euros overall assistance to Ukraine so far, and we will continue to do so, especially in areas of humanitarian demining, physical and social rehabilitation of war veterans, and protection of different groups such as women and children. At the same time, we did not lose sight of other emergencies, such as the devastating earthquake that struck Turkey and Syria. Besides assistance that Croatia provided in the aftermath of the earthquake, this afternoon at the Donors Conference for Turkey and Syria, we will announce additional pledge that will bring our total support to Turkey at 5 million euros and to Syria at 400,000 euros. It is necessary to continue our efforts in mobilizing adequate resources, and there is much more that should be done in our humanitarian work. We, the EU, the international community, should remain committed to these goals. And to close with concrete numbers, as for the year 2023, Croatia announces an increase in humanitarian financing in the total amount of up to 7 million euros. So far, it's our record high. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And finally, for Poland, the Undersecretary of State for Development Cooperation, Mr. Paweł Jablonski.
Ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues, Commissioner Lenarčič, Mr. Fossel, thank you for co-organizing this forum. And I want to say how important it is that we meet today, almost over 1 year since the brutal criminal Russian invasion on Ukraine, which has affected us deeply and showed again how important it is to be ready to deliver humanitarian assistance. On the first day of this invasion, Poland was already there. We are the frontline country, and Poland opened its borders, Polish state opened its borders, and Polish people, most of all, opened their hearts and homes for Ukrainian refugees. And many of your countries, many of your people did the same. Together, we have been hosting Ukrainian people not in refugee camps, but at our homes. We are providing them access to health systems, to education, to social support and family programs, to labor markets. This is approach obviously more costly than the other type, but also much more sustainable. OECD estimated when it comes to Poland that 8 billion euro we spent for the needs of refugees in Poland, and I can assure you that even if it's more costly than traditional approach, we will continue to do so. Still 1.5 million people from Ukraine that arrived after 24th February last year, still they live in Poland. They are sisters and brothers, and we will not leave them behind. This year, we will continue to support them, but we are not turning the blind eye to other regions, especially those that are also indirectly affected by this Russian criminal aggression. Chains of supply of grain and other food chain elements have been distorted, further exacerbating famine and potential food crisis all across the world, most of all North Africa, Middle East, other parts of Asia. Poland has been present there too. We have been delivering our aid to Yemen, to Pakistan, to Sudan, among others. We will continue to do so this year. We will continue to be present in the places of humanitarian disasters, such as the recent devastating earthquake in Turkey and Syria, where we dispatched our our emergency medical teams, rescue teams, and we also have delivered in-kind assistance. In-kind assistance we are continuing to deliver to Ukraine. Just this year we already spent over 100 million euros for this purpose, and we will continue to do so until this war ends, until Russia is defeated, until Ukraine is free. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much indeed. Right, now for a few closing remarks and to announce pledges of those member states whose ministers were not able to be present, please give a final warm round of applause once again to Commissioner Lenarčič.
Earlier this morning, I spoke about multilateralism, solidarity, and ambition. And I was pleased to hear that there is a lot of support to multilateralism, in particular to the importance of upholding the international humanitarian law. I was also pleased to hear a considerable degree of solidarity and ambition, not least through the pledges that we all heard this morning. To these pledges, let me add at this point the pledge on behalf of the European Commission. For this year, 2023, we have already earmarked funding from the EU budget for humanitarian aid in the amount of 2.1 billion euro. Also, I would like to list here for you the pledges by those EU member states that were not able to be present at ministerial level at this meeting. Their pledges are the following, and all amounts are in euros. France, 700 million. The Netherlands, 554 million. Denmark, 363 million. Ireland, 256 million. Luxembourg, 80 million. Italy, 60 million. Lithuania, 37 million. Slovakia, 3.7 million. Romania, 1.4 million. And Portugal, 1.1 million. With this, the total aggregate amount of humanitarian aid for 2023, as pledged today by EU and its member states, amounts to 8.4 billion euros. I wish to thank for all these pledges. I wish to thank to all the speakers at this morning's session for their insights that they shared with us and for the solidarity that they all demonstrated. I think that the Team Europe and its member states have proven their commitment to help people in need across the world. And I think that this gives us a good basis for our discussions that are continued today and tomorrow. I wish us good meetings, good exchanges, and I'm very much looking forward to the outcomes of this forum. Thank you.
Okay, everyone, that brings our opening to a close. Now it's the time to roll your sleeves up and do some work. There's now a coffee break, and we will restart in this room with the next session at 11 o'clock. Okay, all the best.